Hey Reddit, I want to share with you guys a spreadsheet I've been working really hard on. I use this thing to estimate jobs and material costs. Yeah, I want to share it with you. There's a demo in the description below, so check that out if you want to play around with this thing. But yeah, let's just jump right into it. Okay, so we're going to go through how to use this program pretty quickly. So we're going to start off by just looking at this small house right here. And what we'll do is we'll go through how to do a complete material takeoff and estimation using this program. So we're going to start with our floor system and break up our floor into two sections, section 1 and section 2. Once we decide what section we're going to break it in, we're going to decide how we're going to frame it based on the layouts that we can choose from. So we'll click this button that tells the program we're not framing a square house and begin to enter the dimensions of our house. Okay, now we can choose how we want to frame up these sections, what size joist we want to use, and the sort of dimensions of these different sections, right? So once we put that information, you can even select, for section 2, since we have a long span, we can choose to frame 12 inches on center if we want. So once we put in the information for our joist, we put in the information for our rim joist, what we want to use, and sort of the lengths that we're going to need to calculate our rim joists. Next will be our mud sill. So this is just going in. We put kind of the measurements of the perimeter of the house. There is an option to double the mud sills if you want to double the mud sills. There's a box you check there. All right, this next section is where we're going to input information for our girders. These are going to support our joists as they span our floor. So you can put in the total run of these girders, also how you're going to make them. You know, if you're going to use 3 2x10s, you know, you're going to use 4 2x8s. You can even choose LVLs from there. You can also select if your girders are not supported by masonry piers, 6x6 PT, or even lolly columns to support those girders. And there's a little tool here that will tell you based on how many posts you have, like what will be the space in between those posts. Next, we're going to put in material for our subfloor, you know, our subfloor adhesive and our fasteners for our subfloor. We can choose flooring here and underlayment for that flooring if we need. Also, we can choose insulation, how we want to insulate this floor. Do we want to use bats and foam board? Do we want to use spray foam? And there's another section for other materials like sill sealer, like our post bases, like our anchor bolts for those post bases, and then Tico nails that would support this Simpson hardware. Alright, so once we put all this information in, we get a readout of how much material we're going to need and also the total cost. So this floor system is going to cost us $10,585. And that includes things like insulation, flooring. All our lumber is going to be optimized to have the least amount of waste as well. Alright, now we're going to move over to our window wall section. So when we're putting our window information in, we can either select from our preloaded windows in here, or we can just put the window openings as they are. So we'll put the window openings or select which windows we're going to use, and then we're going to have to choose what we're going to use for our headers, our framing headers for those. What dimension and how many of those are we going to use in our headers. And this will calculate how much header material we need. Same thing is true for the doors. We can select either from our preloaded doors, or we can just enter in the amount of doors and the measurements of those rough openings. And then we can select what we're going to use for our tape, what we're going to use for our sill sealer tape, our flange tape for our windows, and then how we're going to insulate around those doors. Next, we can put in information for our walls. So we start with our exterior walls because these are going to be the ones that are going to be insulated. And what we do is we just go down the line and we just put in sort of all of our exterior walls. So you can select if it's a rake wall or not. So if it's a rake wall, you want to let the program know, because for a gable, you're going to either have you're going to have to frame that gable section in. So that just lets the program know. And you can choose whether or not you want to balloon frame it or not. That's an option that's not shown here, but it is in our example videos. Next, we're going to throw in our interior walls. Once again, you just put in the height of those walls and then just go down the list and just put in the length of all of your interior walls. So once you've done with that, you can select what you're going to use for your insulation, whether or not you want to use bats, foam board, or spray foam. And then you can select drywall, right? If you want to use, you can use both 8 and 12-foot drywall and tell the program, you know, what length walls do you want to use 12-foot drywall for. And there you go. You're going to have all your estimate for all your studs, your plates, insulation, all your windows, and tape. Next, we're going to move over to roof. So first thing we'll do is choose our style of roof. So for this roof, it's going to be an intersecting gable, right? So we have two gables, and we'll break it into sections. We'll break it into a main roof and then an intersecting roof. So for our main roof, what we do is we put in our dimensions of our house, the roof pitch, and then what dimension we want to use for our rafters. We can put our subfascia dimension, what we want for our overhang, what we want to use for our lookouts, and sort of how long each individual lookout or outrigger will be, and how those will be framed. Next, we'll choose what we want for our ridge board or ridge beam, and then same thing. See, we can choose what dimensions we want for our ceiling joists, our collar ties, and how often we want those collar ties, and whether or not we're going to overframe this. We won't have a valley rafter. And then we can move on to our intersecting roof. So choose a pitch, what we want to use for our rafters, put in the measurements, whether or not we want to overframe or valley frame it, and then we can choose if it's vaulted or not, if we want to have a ridge beam. And let's say for this example, we want to vault this intersecting part and have three 2x10 LVLs as our ridge beam. So for our third section, which will be our overhang for our deck, we just choose shed roof, and then we can put in the dimensions of that section, which will be our porch. Once again, you just put an overhang and look information, which we won't have any ridge board or ridge beams, right, since it's a shed roof. And you can see it's going to calculate all of this, right? So we can then move down to what we're going to use for our roofing and decking, whether or not we're going to use a zip system or OSB, what we want to do for our underlayment, what shingles we want to use, shingles for our hips and our valleys, for our ridge vents, even drip caps. And there you go. It's going to tell you all the material and how much that's going to cost. It's going to include all our rafters, our subfascia, our lookouts. Even for our valley overframe, it's going to tell us how much lumber we're going to need for our valley jacks. Include things like deck material, deck tape, and even the drip edge. So this will tell you all the material you'll need to frame and roof your house. Alright, now we're going to move over to interior trim. So we can start with window trim. We just put in the measurements of all of our windows, how many windows we have, and then we're going to select what style of trim we're going to do. So how are we going to have an apron or stool? Are we just going to have a picture frame? So select your style, then select what you're going to use for your casing, what the final casing width will be. If you're going to have extension jambs or a back band or some molding, you can choose that as well. And then it will calculate all the material that you're going to need to calculate that. So same thing with doors. You just put in your door measurements and how many doors, the style of your doors, if you're going to have mitered or butt corners, what you're going to use for your material. If you'll have any back band or anything, you can select that there. And then for baseboard, same thing. We can choose a baseboard and a base cap. And you just go down, you put in your wall measurements. It'll calculate how much baseboard you need and the price of that. All right, now we're going to move to exterior. So for window trim, once again, we'll just put in our window measurements and how many windows we have, just like we did for interior. Then we're going to select the style of exterior trim we're going to do, and then what we're going to use for that window trim, right? So once you've selected the style and the window trim, it'll tell you what you need to trim out your windows. Same thing for door, just put in your door measurements, select the style and the material, and it'll give you exactly the material you need to get. Now for siding, sheathing, and like the other types of trim, you can see we've got lap siding on our house. So we're going to select lap siding and then the material we're going to use for that siding. For trim, we're going to have frieze, corner board, and a skirt board. So we can select the material we're going to use for those, as well as the material we're going to use for our fascia and soffit. This is going to allow us in the next section to calculate quickly how much trim we're going to need for these. So for sheathing, let's use zip, and then we're going to use fasteners. We can even choose zip tape. Now, for our siding and sheathing, we're going to go for each side of the house and choose what shape that side is, right? So for our first side is going to be shape 2. So we select shape 2, and we just put in the measurements of that section, put in the roof pitch of that section, and then we can put in the amount of windows we have in those measurements. That'll give us a really more accurate representation of what we're going to need for our siding. We can then select what trim we want to include on that side, whether or not we want to include fascia and soffit. We also said we had a frieze board, a corner board, and a skirt board, so we can include that as well. So for this side, that's just going to be a shape 1, right? A simple rectangle. So once again, select the shape of what that side will be, and then we're going to put in those measurements, right, accordingly. So for side 2, we're going to choose shape 1, put in the measurements, and then once again put in our windows and door measurements to get an accurate representation for our siding. And so this side won't have a fascia or soffit, right, because it's covered, but it will have a corner board, a frieze board, and a skirt board, so we can select those. Now we're going to see the total cost, what it's going to for siding and sheathing and trimming out these two sides, right? So we can see the total amount of siding, how many boards we'll need, how many boards we'll need for our trim, how many boards we're going to need for sheathing. This includes fasteners and also zip tape if we're using zip tape. So it's summed up right there for you. All right, once all this is done, we go to our final summary tab, and this is going to sum up all the material we're going to need for our job, right? Now, this is also where you can change the amount of material, right? So if you want to add extra floor joists, you can add, this is where you can change the amount that you have. Also, all the lumber will be optimized to use the least amount of waste. So if you wanted to change the length of lumber, you can do that here as well. So if we scroll down, you can see it's going to summarize all the information that we've input in our previous sections into one spot. And it's also where we can change the amount and or material we need. All right, that's it. So check it out, right? There's a link in the description of this video where you can get a demo of this. You can play around with it. And tell me what you think. I appreciate y'all's input. I want to try to make this thing better and is more accurate. So if there are things that you guys think I should add to it, just let me know. Yeah, so try out the demo, mess around with it, see if you like it.